Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of a Silent Ovation. My name is Justin McLaughlin, and we are sponsored by Ovation English, the world's first language learning program based on the performing arts. Yes. Lovely program. Taken me a long time to create, and it's really amazing. One of the biggest components of the program is music. A lot of what the way we learn English, how I teach English is through music. One of the reasons why I use music is, I mean, it was kind of when I moved to Ecuador, and and I used to see this in movies as well, But when I moved to Ecuador, and I met Ecuadorians that spoke perfect, I mean, perfect English. And I had students, I mean, they had better English than me, no accent whatsoever, like they were born in the States, and they just moved to Ecuador like 2 days ago. And I would ask them, like, how the hell did you learn? What school did you go to? And they always give me this answer. Like, they were kind of embarrassed to say it, but they're like, I listen to American music. I really like it, and I watch Netflix all the time in English, and the internet. It's always I put it in English, And I'm like, genius. I'm like, how you just listen. And I remember watching movies like Splash 1980 when Tom Hanks and is with the mermaid, and she comes out of the water and she's watching TV and she learns how to speak through the TV. From watching TV, she learns everything through TV, and you see other things, um, and I said, wow, there's something to this. And what I didn't even realize was I was doing it myself. I being in Ecuador, you don't really have access to a lot of American or English shows. Everything's in Spanish. So I just found this one. I saw this one show that really caught my attention called Chavo del Ocho, and it's about these poor kids that one of them lives in a garbage can, and they just have these adventures, and they talk with their neighbors and all this stuff. Um, and because they speak like children, I just was amazed by it. I thought it was really funny, and I started picking up a lot of words from that show. So I started to realize, wow, there is something to this, because I used to try with Duolingo and all this other stuff, and I got nothing. But watching Chavo del Ocho and listening to Los Amigos Invisibles, listening to a lot of Latin music, because obviously I'm always listening to Latin music because that's all there is here, or it's the majority of what's being played here. So I was always listening, and without even knowing or being aware of, I was learning. I mean, words were starting to stick. I never took a Spanish class at all. So the main part, or the first part of Ovation English, is music. You were learning through a metronome, learning pronunciation through a metronome, because the metronome separates all the syllables of each word, so that you could really understand and pronunciate each sound of each syllable of each word in a timely order. And then we go into raps, just because of the beat, and how it makes you move and feel. So, and I always say, without my mother's influence, I probably wouldn't be as big into music. Um, she was the one that really got me into music. Um, she just had this, she had this great collection of music. Like I mean, I remember being very young, and she had handed me, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Heart Band, the album, and she was like, "Here," it was like, "Here, my son, take this. This is like the holy grail of music." And I was like, "This is weird, man. They look weird on this picture." I was afraid of the album cover, but you know she would always, always in the car, she'd be listening to music and she'd just be like, "Oh, listen to this. Listen, I love this. I love this." And I always got a kick of how much she was entertained by music. So, she got me into bands like Boston, Foreigner, Crosby, Stills and Nash, um, all the greats. I mean, really, she had ELO, obviously the Beatles. It just got me into I mean, she's Queen, everything. I mean, I remember listening to 8-track tapes in her little Honda that she had. I mean, back in the day, listening to "Bicycle Race" by Queen, and it was just like amazing hearing the ding, 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 all the bicycle bells and whistles that they had in the song. So, music really started from her just because she gave me that opening of listening to really good music. Obviously it was music from her day, but and from the '60s and the '70s. But that was the music that really touched me. The music at the time, I guess it was in the '80s. I had liked it, but I was really into that classic stuff. Um, so that was a big thing my mother a huge influence my mother had on me, and unfortunately it was probably the biggest influence she had on me because there really wasn't much else. Like my father, my mother was born in the Bronx, but she was Italian. She came from a Sicilian family. Her name was Regina Cotero, and her mother came from Sicily, came over the boat from Sicily. So she was, first generation American. Um, and the Italians back then, when they came here, they didn't teach their kids Italian. They were like, "We're here in America. You got to speak American and all this stuff." Because, I just wish that she learned it because I would have loved to learn it from her. Um, and she grew up with a very traditional family. Father Italian, mother Sicilian, but the father was very Italian, like very machismo Italian, like the the wife stays home and cooks and cleans, and the father, very, and he was abusive too. He was to the mother, from the stories that I've been told. So, and my mother had two other siblings. She was the youngest, so she had Gracie was her older sister in the middle, and then there was my uncle Charlie, who was the oldest, and just a great dude, just a great dude. Not a great father, but just a great dude. Loved him. Probably the only good thing about that family was Charlie. Um, and she came from in a time where you went to high school, and once you graduated, and if you didn't have money, you went into the person you were dating was you got married and you had kids right at 18, and that's kind of what she did. She was she had met my father in high school. They were going to the same school, but it was a different. They both went to Catholic school, but one was all girls and the other one was all boys. And so they met each other there after she had broken up with a guy named Joey Dillon that she still had talked. I mean, I remember hearing about this guy and her saying, "I wish I had gone with Joey. I wish I had gone with Joey." And I'm like, he was an Irish guy. Why would you keep going with an Irish guy? And she told me that the reason why she didn't stay with Joey Dillon is because his parents told him to get that wop out of a house. That dago wop. They Irish and Italian. They didn't get along back in those days. In the Bronx. I don't know if they still do, but whatever. But so she ended up meeting my father, and my father was a good-looking dude, good-looking guy. So I'm sure that was it. And I don't know. He didn't really have much of a personality that I knew of, but maybe I don't know. But I think they kind of just met each other and said, "Okay, yeah, I guess this is it." They got married, and they had my brother in 1970 and had me in 1975. Um, I don't remember them together at all. At all. I don't remember them being married at all because they got divorced when I was 5, and my mother took off right after that for about 3 years. Um, so I don't remember that. I just, as I said, I remember living with my father for that time and just seeing my mother a little bit. So when I saw, when I would see my mother at nights, and she would bring me the Pepsi and yodels, you know, I just, all I thought about was just getting away from my father. So when she would pick me up, I'd be like, so, when am I getting out of here? When, oh, I'm working on it, because she was dating this guy Chuck, and she loved him still. I mean, just loved him. So he was everything to her. And he was a contractor, and was a way to he had a way of making money and all this stuff. Um, so I waited. I just waited until the day where it was she was ready. So um, when I was 9, she had told my brother and I that that we were gonna move in with her, and it was like a celebration day. I mean, I just couldn't wait. I just couldn't wait. And we moved into the apartment complex right next door, which was, I said, 140 North Broadway, and and it was just fun. It was just fun. It was just absolute fun. All we did was listen to music, watch horror movies. My mother made me watch horror movies with her when I was 9, and all of them. The Exorcist. I mean, all of them. Friday the 13th. Because she was a big horror movie buff, and she wanted a buddy to watch them with. Instead of saying, Justin, you're too young for this, it's going to give you nightmares, she was like, let's go, come on, I'm going to make cookies, we're going to watch this horror movie, and we're going to be scared, and I'm like, all right, this is awesome, and I'm watching these movies, and I didn't realize the horrible nightmares that I was going to have after that. I mean, I was scared shitless at night. Thinking, every time I heard something, I'd be the one, the sheets over my head and being like, they don't see me, they don't see me, they can't see me because I got the sheet over it, they can't see. But obviously nothing was there, but it's just from being exposed to all that at a very young age was not smart. But, she was fun. She was fun. There was no order, you know. You know, she hated to cook. She did not like cooking at all. So the food that she always got was fun food, cakes, cookies, bologna, tuna, steakums, anything that was terrible for you, that's what she got, you know. My brother and I lived off peanut butter and jelly for years and years and years. I mean, peanut butter and jelly was everything, Without peanut butter and jelly, I'd probably be dead. you know. So, and I didn't realize, I mean, I kind of started to realize when I went to school and I didn't have, there were days where if I didn't make my lunch, I didn't have lunch. So, there are days I just didn't make lunch and I'd go to school and I didn't have lunch and I'd be starving, and teachers be like, "Where's your lunch?" And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't make it today, and they're like, "Doesn't your mom make it?" And I'd be like, "No, she doesn't make it," like, whose mother makes their food? Whose mother makes their kid lunch? Come on. I didn't know. I just thought this was the normal, if you didn't make your lunch, you didn't eat. So, but seeing their faces and seeing their reactions to this, I kind of said, and even like kids would ask, why don't you have lunch? I'm like, And when I did bring lunch, it was just a sandwich. It was just a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and that was it. Unless it was a Friday and my mother would give me like $2 because Friday was pizza day, so I could eat pizza. So that she would supply. That was easy. Here, go. But yeah, living with her was like having a college roommate at 9, 10, 11. At that being young. She just was like, there was no bedtime, there was no curfew. I could stay out all night if I wanted, do whatever I wanted. There was no nighttime sleep, no time to go to sleep or anything, nothing. I ate whatever I wanted. I did whatever I wanted, you know. So of course, my mother was a huge smoker. She smoked 2 packs a day for her entire life. So, you know, I remember asking her about cigarettes, and she had, I think, 9 or 10. I think it was 9, and she was like, "Here, try it." And I was like, "Huh?" I was like, "All right." And I was like, of course, I was choking, but I just, since that one hit, I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna try it again. Maybe it just, didn't work the first time." So I would just, after that, I would just take her cigarettes and go outside, go into the little woods that we had and the bushes and just smoke cigarettes. 9, 10, 11, and it was funny because I would have, sometimes I'd have, other kids around, and we'd be playing something, and I'd break out a cigarette, and they'd be like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I'm like, "Smoking a cigarette." Like nothing, like, "Hey, I'm having a cigarette." Like, "What? What are you doing?" I just didn't think, it wasn't anything. Just thought it was normal, Obviously now it's, I know that wasn't, but so I didn't, at that time living with my mother, I just didn't see anything wrong. I was just so happy to be out of that hellhole with my father that I didn't care, you know. So I was living with my mother and my brother, and as I said, my brother's Michael, and he's 5 years older, and I know that he had to deal with my father as well, and I know that the divorce had really affected him, and he just became a bully. He just became a bully, not because he wanted to. I just think he just had a lot of anger, and he didn't know what to do with, and so he would take it out on me. He would take it out on me. And I just made me so angry. Just like, fucking leave me alone. Like, leave me the fuck alone. Like, even when we were living with our father, I mean, he was still like, lock me in the closet, put a pillow over my face, so I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die," or I'd be taking a nice warm shower, and then there comes a bucket of ice cold water, right on top of me, or, I'd make food, and, he'd just ruin it, spike it with like salt, or put detergent in my iced tea, shit like that. So that's the that was the only bad part about living with my mother, and the other bad part about living with my father was I had to deal with him too, my brother. But the good thing about my brother was he loved to make me laugh. That I will get. He loved, and he was good at it. He knew how to make me laugh. He was very funny guy when he wanted to be. So he would torture me by day and make me laugh at night, and my mother, whenever he would, try to make me laugh, my mother was always there, like, "Yeah, isn't he so funny?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but did you say anything to him when he was, being a dick before?" So, um, so living with my mother just gave me that sense of I had no structure, nothing. I just did whatever. Like, I was an adult basically, I just did whatever the hell I wanted to do. Um, so, you know, and she just wasn't that type. She wasn't a go-getter. She went to the PTA meetings just because she had to. She didn't want to know. And really, the only thing, when she'd go and come back, she'd just say, "Your teacher said that you're just so quiet, such a good boy, you're just so quiet." And she would praise me for being quiet. But in school, you're not supposed to be quiet. You're supposed to be answering questions and supposed to be learning and engaging, not quiet. And I guess she didn't, I guess for her, the fact that there was nothing bad, so nothing to be ashamed for her, she was happy. "Oh, that Jesse, he's a good boy, he's quiet." So my mother took that as, okay, I'm a good parent then. I guess that's what I'm thinking, because she was so happy, and I was like, okay, that's cool. I'll just keep being quiet, you know. No problem with me. I like being quiet. I got nothing to say. So, and obviously, not having structure as a kid or having any rules, um, you tend to go in ways that you really shouldn't, because I just had the freedom to do whatever, and I kind of saw her and the way she lived, and I was like, all right, fuck it, I wanted to do whatever I could. And so obviously, once you get into like 12, 11, 12, you start watching different movies, and I was watching Cheech and Chong, and I thought that was just hilarious. It was better than watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, over and over again with her. So I saw that, and I saw these two dudes getting high and like, feeling like they were in outer space and loving life, and I was like, that's how I want to feel. I want to feel like that. So, um, when later, I think when I was about 12, um, we moved in, me, my mother, and my brother, we moved in with Chuck, her boyfriend, who's now her second husband. And once in a while, he had three kids of his own, older, and they would stay for a while. And when they would stay, I knew that they were older, and I knew that they had some type of something. So I'd always look through their shit. Sorry, guys, if you hear this, but yeah, I'd always look through their shit. Just curious. And uh, my stepbrother at the time, Chucky, he had weed in his drawer. So I was, and I only knew it just from watching Cheech and Chong and whatever else. I didn't know really. I just knew that I want this. So I found it. I took some, you know, the bud, and I think I just rolled the bud in the paper because I didn't know anything, and I smoked it. I don't think I really got anything from it at that time, but I just said, wow, okay, I want to do this again. So um, I didn't always have access to it, but whenever I did, or from, my stepbrother or stepsister, I did, and each time I would get a little bit high or a little bit feeling, and I would really like that feeling. I really liked that feeling. Because, I mean, I did drink a little. I just never liked alcohol, thankfully. But I just don't understand the whole why people dig alcohol. I mean, it smells gross, it tastes gross, and it makes you feel like absolute garbage the next day. So as a teenager, I drank just to get drunk, because that's, it's new and you're trying it, But I remember drinking and being like, this tastes terrible. Beer is just awful. It's just like gross. But I would drink it just to get smashed, and then the next day I'd be hurting. So once, I got a little bit older and I started hanging out, once I got into high school and I started hanging out with, certain people, I found weed, and then once I found out where to get it, we'd get it in the Bronx, down on Fordham Road, from all the Jamaicans. So at 14, 15, 16, I'm going down, to the city, to the Bronx, and, little white boy, and buying weed. Later, I was going down there to buy cocaine at 15. So, yeah, so that's the thing. I just, so once I started to really get into drugs, I didn't come home, you know, uh, and my mother didn't really say much, Um, when I'd leave, I'd be like, yo, I'm going out. And pretty much most of the time, she would just say, okay, just don't die. I'm like, all right, that should be easy enough, you know. So, I got into some heavy things. I started hanging out with college kids, and I had this really good friend, Terrence Sands. He was a year older than me, and we were very much alike. Very much alike, and we just did everything under the sun. I mean, we got our hands on everything, and we did it every day. We'd go to school smashed. We'd go to school tripping on acid. I mean, it was just every day. And then we started hanging out with the college kids or the graduates, and they loved that. These two high school kids were cool or whatever. So, because we would get our own stuff, so we would be sharing it with them, and they'd be sharing it with us. So, you know, um, so we just had this great connection with these guys with this group of older people, and they just got us into even more shit, you know, uh, especially cocaine, and which I'm so thankful. I started it at 15 and I stopped at 18, a little bit before 18. I'm so thankful because yes, I mean I had a great time. It was fun, but I just knew that this is just it wasn't a community thing, It's something that's always hush hush. Hey, I got something. Come with me, And I like, that's what I loved about weed was like, puff puff pass, like hey, let's have some fun, let's play some music, whatever. It was a community thing. So but it's just the fact that I got into that. I almost got into heroin. Thank God I didn't. But I could have got into a lot of trouble if I didn't have half a brain, which is pretty much all I was running on was half a brain. But luckily I had that. And just I always had that thing inside of me, that pull, like, hey, you got something to do, but I didn't know what, but I was just like, hey, I just gotta get going. So, especially at I remember there was this one time, I think I was 16, 15 or 16, my friend Gene Kim, who I told you I bought the bass from, his parents went away for a month. Woo! So, and it was summer break, and I think it was like we started the end of June, like maybe June 30th until like till his parents came home. I think it was like July 20 something, So I told my mother, hey, I'm moving out for a month. I'm gonna go live with Gene for a month, and same thing. All right, just don't die, which I almost did. Uh, I almost did heroin. I mean, every night there'd be just drugs everywhere, big piles of cocaine on a piano, and I'm sick, 15, 16. I mean, I should be, shouldn't have been into that, but I was. I learned a lot about that stuff, and in a way, I'm thankful because that's how I met Gene, and that's how I found the instrument that was meant for me, which was the bass. Yes, I had to go through some experiences, but that was it. But the fact that my mother was okay with that, and the thing that really hit me was um, during that time I was at a friend's house just partying, and there was a knock on her door, and it was my brother, and he just grabbed me and said, "Okay, you're fucked. Like you're just out of your mind. Let's go." I mean, he was 5 years older than me, so he was maybe 20. He had the sense to be like, okay, this kid's going in the wrong direction. Not even my mother would see that. My mother told me I didn't want to. I tried to stop him. I tried to stop him because I was pissed at the time of that he came. You know, but later on, obviously, I understood, and I was like, okay, yeah, all right. Why didn't she? It's like she's saying, like on my side, like it wasn't my fault. He made me come. Like she was fine with me partying. So she. The thing about my mother is, she didn't. She wasn't a parent. She wasn't a parent, but she allowed me to learn everything on my own. And there's something to say for that. I mean, I definitely probably could. I would have been a lot better off. I had more structure, um, but she, the fact that I did everything on my own. I had to learn how to cook. I had to learn, everything because that's just how she was. The only thing that she did was, she was good with clothes and cleaning. She loved that shit. Um, but everything else I had to do on my own. So that gave me that sense of independence, with her. Um, but later in life, I realized the lack of structure really affected me when I became a parent. When I became a parent, not when I became a parent, but when I had children of my own. And I remember, just kind of at first just being like her, like, like, it's all right, and then just kind of getting that thing in my head, like, wait a minute, or my ex being like, hey, that's not right, and just being like, yeah, I can't do that. I can't be doing this to my kids, Yes, I had an interesting life and all this stuff. And, my mother was like my cheerleader, whenever I succeeded something or I got into music or whatever, or I had a show or something happened, I tell her and she got so excited, so she was fun in that way. But she was not a parent. And that ended up really screwing me up. I don't blame her. I don't blame her at all. I don't blame anybody for my mistakes. Um, but not having structure really damaged me as a parent. But I learned. I did learn. I did learn, and I did gain structure. I did. The one thing about my ex is, she did show me those types of things, and that I was grateful for. And proper diet, what a kid should eat. I didn't know. I didn't know. I had no idea what was the right things to eat, what a kid should eat, what's good for them, what's good for their brain, what's good for their skin, what's good for their fingernails and teeth and all that stuff. So, I really, I really, I lost a lot by having her as my mother. But in the same, I gained a lot. I gained a lot of knowledge, a lot of street knowledge, a lot of just common sense because had to fend for myself always. Um, Now, the sad thing about this is, she was my mother, but I never respected her, just because she just never had any guts to do anything. She never fought for anything. She never had that in her to fight, you know, and to do the right thing for her children. She just was really in it for herself, and she liked the company. She always said she would have hated to have girls, and boys were just easy. Yeah, because boys don't want to be around the house. Boys don't want to be around their mother. They just want to be outside playing. So it's easy. But she never took that responsibility. And it was when I was living, 3 years after moving to Ecuador, uh, she had called me to tell me that my father had died, and she sent me this letter that my brother had written to her when we were young, kind of explaining, a little bit in detail how my father was and how much of a dick he was and how much of a dick he was to me and everything. And my mother said, "Yeah, your brother wrote this. I don't believe any of it. I don't know where he's getting this from." I read it and I just got the chills because it resonated with me, of course. And I was like, "Ma, what do you mean? I mean, he did these things. I don't think you guys really, I think you're wrong about that. Like she would like say like we were imagining it, and then I would talk to my brother, and my brother would say she just doesn't want to take responsibility for what she did. She was selfish. Uh-huh. She was selfish, and she abandoned us for a guy, and she left us with a guy who was very sick. She left her children, her very young children, alone with a very sick man who was an alcoholic, and she knew that's why she left him. And still to this day, she just she will not accept that, you know. And that's the thing that really hurts the most is that she just, She doesn't want to take responsibility for the things she did right. All she wants to say is, "Yeah, we had fun, right?" And she thinks that's a good parent. But obviously she had her she went through hell, or she went through stuff when she was a kid. I mean, she had a family, but her father was kind of weird and did some crazy shit to his wife or her mother. But it just, I just, and really, her older sister and brother were the same. Just terrible parents, terrible parents. So I can't blame her totally, but it's just a lot. Um, so coming from these two sides of very sick people, it was amazing that I'm even alive now, and I'm even doing this podcast. But I don't, as I said, I never will put blame on them, ever, 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 ever. Whatever decisions I made that affected my life negatively, that was my decision. All my decision. I'm an adult and whatever. I mean, I made those decisions. So I could never go back and say it was them. No. No, everybody makes mistakes and everybody fails, and that's just part of it. So I take that as that. So, um, yeah, so that she was a big part of my music inspiration, and that's where Ovation came from. So that's it for episode 4. I'm hoping that you're getting something out of it. If not, I don't give a shit. As I said, this is more for me than you. But I do hope that you can at least get something out of it and maybe understand it. So, once again, this is a Silent Ovation. My name is Justin McLaughlin, and we are sponsored by Ovation English, the world's first and only language learning program based on the performing arts. All right, I will see you next time. Peace.